Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. Welcome to Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, the series in which I expose and debunk falsehoods, misconceptions, and outright lies spread about the men's rights movement. So let's get stuck into it. So last episode in this series, I covered the intro and citations of the article called, "It's Not Female Privilege, but Patriarchal Backfiring on Men, Exposing Men's Rights Activism," which appears on the Cake website. So let's continue where I left off, which is at the start of their interview with a mod, from the Exposing Men's Rights Activists Facebook page. One thing you should know though, as is very common with these types of individuals, when they use the term EMRA, what they actually mean is anyone who disagrees with their ideology. Think of it in the terms of a radical Christian calling a Buddhist, or a Hindu, or a Muslim, an atheist, because they don't believe in the Christian God. Clearly this isn't logical. But on with the interview. Talking to Cake, EMRA explained further about the group's history and dealing with men's rights activists. "You've all banded together to expose the bigoted rhetoric of men's rights activism. Was there a specific event or experience that led you to come together and create this group online? Many of us have had experiences adminning pages prior to coming together to coalesce for the EMRA project, but the one thing that ignited the creation of EMRA was the mass reporting and removal of a page known as The Real Face of Men's Rights Activism, RFMRA, twice by MRAs, MGTOWs and masculinists. One of our leading admins was also an admin of RFMRA and can testify to the mass reporting, mass trolling campaigns that MRA pages would wage against us in our efforts to expose them for the bigots that they are. Okay, so there are a number of things I am not clear on here. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure how the Facebook reporting is handled. I'm not sure how many reports are needed. I'm not sure if Facebook has someone checking each reported item to see if it does break the guidelines. And I'm not sure if there is a counter-claim process, where you can dispute the report. Now, I'm a big proponent of free speech, even if that free speech is offensive, so if what the feminists say here is true, that there has been campaigns run by MRAs, MGTOWs or masculinists, to falsely get their page shut down, then I would have to agree with the feminists that it's wrong. Although, I think the most likely scenario is offended individuals flag specific posts that they found offensive, as opposed to a conspiracy. It's impossible to say though, as we are not presented with any evidence, not even the names of the supposed MRA, MGTOW, or masculinists' Facebook pages. But I got a little curious about The Real Face of Men's Rights Activism Facebook page, so I thought I'd have a look. As the article states, the page is no longer on Facebook, but I did find it on Tumblr. The first thing we see is this wonderful image. Because all men are kings, right? Including the homeless ones. Once again, this is the perfect example of feminists only seeing those men at the top, and being blind to the multitude of men at the bottom. The About the Author blurb says, "This is a blog to share and alert the public to the bigoted, homophobic, woman-hating movement that is the men's rights movement. During my time on Facebook I have amassed hundreds of screenshots taken from MRA pages and groups showing just how horrible they are. These screenshots shall be shared here along with other news about the men's rights movement." Well then, let's have a look at some of these horrible homophobic, women-hating, screenshots taken from actual men's rights pages. The first image we find is of a guy wearing a fedora, with a woman. And someone has commented about it. The source claims it's from 4chan, but there's no other info. I find this one kind of a strange example, as it's making fun of a bigoted stereotype perpetrated by feminists. Let's see what's next. Here we have 4 comments on Twitter, making fun of rape. Are these comments in bad taste? Sure. Does that make them MRAs? The answer is, no. They are most likely just trolls trying to stir the pot and get a reaction. So I thought I'd actually investigate, unlike the Real Face of Men's Rights Activism page. I started with Leviathan Pride on Twitter. His profile says, "I'm 9 but I fuck like a 12-year-old." Co-host at the Pridecast. So let's have a look at Pridecast. The most offensive podcast in the universe featuring Leviathan pride, booze and guns and guests. Okay, so it's a couple of guys, presumably guys, who do an offensive podcast. Do I need to ask? What the fuck has this got to do with the men's rights movement? But let's be thorough. So I did a Google search with the name Leviathan Pride, and EMRA, on Google and got 0 hits containing the two terms. So I think it's safe to say, he's not a fucking EMRA. Next up is Martin Parker. Looking at his Twitter account, all he does is make bad jokes. And doing a Google search for Martin Parker and EMRA, all I got was 1 hit from the Master Retailers Association. He's not a fucking EMRA. Next we have Sid, who has had his account suspended. And finally we have Carl Lukens. And looking at his Twitter account and doing a Google search, I couldn't find anything linking him to the men's rights movement. And do you know why? Because he's not a fucking EMRA. For a page that apparently has a ton of evidence against the men's rights movement, it's not off to a great start. Next we have a Black Lives Matter post. Next we have a comment that reads, "The very fact we still have a bunch of men telling women what their lives are like and what they need and don't need, is proof of why we still need feminism." Which is kind of ironic considering feminism is constantly telling men what to think, what to feel, what to wear, and even fucking how to sit. Next. "Not all men" is a phrase coined by men's rights activists for the purpose of deliberately derailing discussion of valid feminist issues. It serves no purpose other than to demonstrate that MRAs consider it more important to protect men's feelings than to discuss violence against women. Oh boy. It's funny, isn't it? We often hear, "not all Muslims," when someone is talking about Muslim extremists. And I would argue that it's a fair statement to make, as not all Muslims are extremists. We often hear, "not all African Americans," when someone is talking about gang-related crime. And I would argue that this is a fair comment, as it's wrong to label an entire group based on a minority. And most African Americans are not in drug gangs. And we often hear, "not all feminists," when talking about bigoted extremists within feminism. And once again this is true, not all feminists are like that, just most of them. But for some reason, when someone is stereotyping all males, replying with "not all men," is somehow wrong. Which is very strange, because males as a group are more diverse than Muslims as a group, African Americans as a group, and feminists as a group. So if it's wrong to stereotype a smaller, less diverse group which shares a belief system, an ideology, or a culture, then how exactly is it appropriate to stereotype a larger, more diverse group, made up of multiple belief systems, ideologies, and cultures, based on nothing more than gender? And of course if the same thing was being done to females, there would be outrage. Here's the deal, stop stereotyping males, stop portraying only males as the problem, and we won't need to use the term, "not all men." If feminists actually cared about equality, we wouldn't have a reason to use such a term. And the page continues like that. This of course is typical. The page is actually called, "The Real Face of Men's Rights Activism," yet they use non-MRAs and feminist straw fedoras as their examples, instead of real MRAs. Funny that. They start out with a narrow-minded, bigoted false stereotype of what an MRA is and believes. Then they look for examples that fit that false stereotype, and conclude that these examples must be MRAs, based on nothing more than their original false stereotype. They then use these examples to support their original false stereotype. In other words, they are using circular reasoning, essentially trying to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But back to the interview on Cake. Facebook's reporting system allows for such things to occur. If there's a certain number of reports within a period of time, Facebook's algorithm will automatically remove content from the page. It takes about 8 to 10 removals to get a page permanently unpublished, which is what happened to our FMRA. And if this is true, then admittedly it's pretty fucked up. Sure, the real face of men's rights activism page is inaccurate and offensive. But I don't think it should be removed. Just the opposite. In fact, I think a very bright light should be shined on it, so it's exposed. I have to ask though, if this was orchestrated by EMRA, MGTOW, or masculinist groups, as opposed to individuals, then why haven't those same groups silenced EMRA in the same way? EMRA does post very similar content after all. Next. EMRA, in response to the dismantling of RFMRA, was created by an Australian Aboriginal woman in hopes that the effort to fight back against the MRA reactionaries wouldn't have been in vain. She invited an admin from RFMRA to join in. Through some struggles and significant turns of events, EMRA blossomed into one of the more successful feminist pages on Facebook. So you work on exposing MRAs and their bigotry. But why do you think gendered violence and discrimination against men is so underreported? We believe there exists a stigma around men being subjected to violence. In this patriarchal society, men are expected to be able to be strong and to hold their own. There's a certain image that a man has to live up to, and if he doesn't, then he is often preyed upon by the rest of society for his shortcomings. This is especially the case if men were to be attacked by women. Women are viewed as the fairest, or weakest sex, and with men being expected to act as the stronger sex, they are seen as subhuman if they cannot fend for themselves against attacks from women. Knowing that this stigma exists, many men surrender themselves to the whims of abusive partners as opposed to coming out about the violence that they face, because the fear of what society will brand them as is more significant to them than the fear of their abusive partners. They can trust society to help them. I would generally agree with this. But I think it's a lot more than women just being seen as the fairer sex. We have after all had 40+ years of feminist propaganda telling us that only women can be victims, and only men can be victimizers. If this is really such a concern to feminists, then where are the shelters for abused men? In fact, last year in my home city of Melbourne, the feminist-led White Ribbon campaign held an event titled, Man Up. Man up, treat her right, end your silence, stop the violence. A benefit to encourage men to stand up to domestic violence. Of course, not only does this campaign use the stereotype of male victimizer, female victim, which makes it harder for male victims to come forward and be believed, but it also had the nerve to use the term, man up. Isn't it funny that feminists only ever seem to be against gender roles when it suits them? Next. In the course of running EMRA, what cases of men being subject to gendered violence and discrimination do you most often hear of? We more often hear of MRAs arguing about women hitting men and getting away with it, but society claiming, in the eyes of MRAs anyhow, that men are not permitted to hit back. A lot of their gender violence-oriented arguments stem from not being able to hit back. Which is an argument we hardly waste time on entertaining because, frankly, no adult should be hitting anybody. I would agree that no adult should be hitting anyone, which includes violent women. But let me guess, EMRA isn't speaking out against violent women, are they? And although I agree that no adult should be hitting anyone, I do believe that everyone has the right to defend themselves. Everyone, which means both men and women. It's simple. Don't hit others. But if you do, don't be surprised if they hit back. I don't see why this is such a hard concept to understand. Next. In our experience of running youth kiawas, we get a lot of trolls littering our comments with the suggestion that women enjoy many privileges and therefore have it easier than men. How do you counter this? Well, I'll outline a couple of so-called privileges that women allegedly experience and refute them chronologically. The big one we always seem to get revolves around the court bias against fathers when it comes to child custody. In the United States, for example, something like 80% of the time, mothers will be awarded custody over the fathers. The existence of this, in an isolated view, definitely has the appearance of a privilege. But when examined with the big picture, namely, that women are the caregivers, housewives, and men are the money makers, it really isn't surprising that the court system would hand custody of a child over to the mother. the courts have this patriarchal view that fathers are inherently incapable of caring for children in the same manner that mothers care for them, because mothers are biologically wired to stay at home and raise their offspring. But this is hardly based off of some matriarchal, female privilege. This is what is known as patriarchal backfiring on men. Wow, this is right out of some Orwellian nightmare. So a system which privileges females, and is supported by feminist groups like Now, isn't actually female privilege, but actually male disadvantage. Wow. I don't believe that we live in a patriarchy in the West. So therefore I can't believe in the term patriarchy backfiring, which is just a tool to dismiss male issues in any case. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's assume for the sake of argument she is 100% correct, and we live in a patriarchy, and the court system favoring mothers is in fact patriarchy backfiring. It still does not change the fact that it is female privilege. Regardless of whether you believe in patriarchy theory, gynocentrism, or whatever, it is a privilege afforded to mothers based on their gender. Therefore, it is female privilege, no matter how you try to redefine it. But she is so entrenched into her ideology, that she thinks female privilege can only exist under a matriarchy. Wow. Next. An argument that frequently evolves out of this custody contention is that women take everything from men when it comes to divorce. Again, this is an example of the patriarchy backfiring. The reason being because, 1. Women on average get paid significantly less than men do for doing the same job, which is taken into account by the court systems when they make their rulings. Actually, no. Women do not get paid less for doing the same job. That has been illegal for the last 50 years. They do however on average earn less, due to factors like choice of career, and hours worked. If women want to earn as much as men, on average, then they need to choose higher paying, typically more dangerous work, and work longer hours including overtime. Here's an idea, maybe the family courts should give shared custody to both parents, and allow women to focus more on their careers, so they can earn as much as men. Oh hold on, feminists are against that. Next. And, 2, because the woman is seen as this fragile being, made only to care for children, the man is still expected to provide because that is his role, according to patriarchal precedent. Patriarchal precedent supported by feminist organizations like Now. Presumption of Joint Custody/Shared Parenting for Minor Children, March 2005. The National Organization for Women, New York State, Incorporated strongly urges the Assembly and Senate of New York to oppose this legislation. This bill seeks to create the statutory of presumption of joint custody for all minor children whose parents are no longer married, so that both parents can continue to share in the responsibilities and duties of the children's upbringing. Shared parenting is defined as the award of custody to both parties so that both parties share equally the legal responsibility and control of such child and share equally the living experience in time and physical care of assure frequent and continuing contact with both parties, as the court deems to be in the best interests of the child, taking into consideration the location and circumstances of each party. The assertion that shared parenting is in the best interests of minor children is on its face untrue and is directly contradicted by the body of academic research on the subject, as well as the disastrous experience of California, one of the first states to adopt this experiment. Now, a leading feminist organization has been pushing these so-called patriarchal precedents for decades. Next. A third argument I hear, read, is that women are the ones that don't have to sign up for the draft. Firstly, I foresee that changing very soon due to the fact that women are now gaining more access into combat-related career fields within the armed forces. If she thinks women will be added to the draft anytime soon, or ever, then she is fucking delusional. The left-wing progressives would go nuts, claiming it a form of female oppression and abuse, and no doubt indisputable evidence that we live in a patriarchy, all the while ignoring that males are already forced into the draft if they desire to vote. And the right-wing conservatives would do a fantastic job of white knighting. Personally, I think the draft should be scrapped altogether. But if you are going to have one, then it should be mandatory for everyone. Next. Secondly, women, being viewed as weak, were not permitted to enlist, let alone get drafted, for hundreds of years by many armies because they were seen as incapable of properly handling the equipment needed to wage war. It wasn't that they were incapable of handling the equipment needed to wage war. But there are two factors. The first is physical strength. Typically males are stronger than females. That's why typically we segregate sporting events based on gender. And as many combat roles require a high level of physical fitness, obviously, on average, males are more suited. This is particularly true when it comes to roles such as infantry. But, I did say many combat roles, not all. With the modern-day army, there are many roles other than infantry. Some combat, some support. The second reason is that due to the female reproduction bottleneck, traditionally women have been seen as more important and protected, while males have been seen as more disposable. To put the female reproduction bottleneck in simple terms, women are limited to one pregnancy at a time, usually only resulting in one child after 9 months of gestation, while a male could impregnate multiple women over the same time period. In other words, an egg is more rare and valuable than sperm. But in the modern Western world, with an abundance of food, clean drinking water, sanitation, and modern medicine, we have a high population rate. Reproduction is no longer a high priority for our survival. So the concept of females being the protected class, and males being the disposable class, is no longer relevant. Therefore, if you are going to have a draft, both males and females should take equal responsibility for the protection of their nation. Next. Although, since we are on the topic, I must point out that the vast majority of the men who make these assertions are the same men who exclaim, women shouldn't be allowed to serve if they can't do pull-ups. And here we have a classic example of a feminist misrepresenting her opponent's argument. There is a physical requirement for both men and women in the military. And some roles have more of a physical requirement than others. Let me stress, these requirements are for both genders, and are there for a reason. If a man is 5 foot tall, or overweight, or has chronic asthma, it's highly doubtful that he's going to pass the physical requirements necessary. And it would be irresponsible to allow him to pass if he cannot meet the minimum requirements. It would be dangerous to him. It would be dangerous to his fellow soldiers. And it would lower the overall effectiveness of the military. The requirements are there for a reason. And anyone who meets those requirements should be allowed to serve. Male or female. What is of concern though, is when those requirements are lowered exclusively for females. A recent example was a female firefighter, who after repeatedly failing to meet the requirements, was given a pass based on gender. This could easily result in the loss of life. If she is incapable of dragging someone from a fire, then she is not fit to do the job. And let me stress, there are women who have met these requirements in the past, and are actively working as firefighters. Not everyone is capable of doing every job. It's just a harsh reality of life. Hey, I'd love to go into space, but I simply don't meet the requirements to be considered. The vast majority of people don't. If you don't like it, take it up with Mother Nature. But, there are many jobs in the military. Many roles to play. And although all of them require some degree of fitness, they don't all have the high requirements of frontline infantry. But let's look at her statement again. It reads, women shouldn't be allowed to serve if they can't do pull-ups. I would think this statement is pretty self-evident. If someone, male or female, can't do pull-ups, how exactly are they meant to carry their gear, their weapon, and be an effective fighter? It's kind of like saying, someone shouldn't be a taxi driver, if they are incapable of driving a car. Or maybe a better example would be, a blind man shouldn't be a taxi driver because he cannot see. Let me put it simply for you all. If you don't meet the requirements of a job, and you are capable of changing yourself, either through improving your fitness, or further education, or whatever, then do so. But if you will never be capable of meeting those requirements, no matter how much hard work you do, then I'm sorry, but it's time to consider a new career in a different field. Your desires don't trump the requirements of the job. And sometimes circumstances are beyond your control. It might suck, but that's life. Next. Honestly, I find that a lot of these complaints have more to do with patriarchy backfiring and requiring men to fulfill nearly impossible, if not oppressive, obligations to uphold this twisted normalcy society has constructed. Once again, I really don't care if you call it patriarchy backfiring, or whatever. It's still female privilege. Oh, but I forgot, in her mind female privilege can only exist in a matriarchy. What a fucking joke. Next. Are MRAs only concerned about heterosexual men? What harmful stereotypes about men does it promote? Where does this leave trans men, differently abled men, other non-normative men, the genderqueer, a gender or neutral people? In my time in dealing with MRAs, they are 100% concerned with the struggle of privileged men and not people of other gender identities. Just a couple days ago I had an MRA troll torment one of our supporters because in his words, feminists have to make everything into a gender issue, so, of course, he and other MRAs didn't care about trans issues. Wow. Look at that. Hearsay anecdotal evidence that may, or may not have come from an MRA. Clearly that must represent every MRA everywhere. Funny thing is, I just saw this interview in my feed about half an hour ago. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but might include some of it at the end, post-credits. The Honey Badgers also recently did a show on trans issues. And as most of the issues we talk about include all men, those issues automatically include trans men. It's not only privileged white straight babies being circumcised. How you would even determine whether a newborn baby is straight or gay, or trans or whatever is beyond me anyway. But I can guarantee you, there are no doctors refusing to circumcise a male baby, because it's transgender. This issue, like many, is not confined by race, sexuality, or gender identity. It affects men across a wide spectrum. Now it is true, that we don't spend a great deal of time talking about the specific issues affecting trans men or women. Just as the NAACP doesn't spend a great deal of time talking about issues that affect trans men and women of color. Does that make the NAACP anti-trans? Of course not. There is one group though that is anti-trans women. Can you guess who they are? I'll give you a clue. It starts with radical, and ends in feminists. I may have made that a bit easy to guess. So it's ironic, and hypocritical, that EMRA accuses us of not caring about trans issues, while ignoring the radical anti-trans feminists in their own ideology. But of course, this is all just a huge distraction on their behalf. Instead of actually dealing with our arguments, they create and attack bigoted straw men. Typical. Next. You see, MRAs are concerned with black and white lines of thinking and don't see that things aren't that simple. They still perceive the world as just being cisgender men and women, in the 1950s era where people have specific roles that cannot be deviated from. And here we have another straw man. Or maybe we should call it what it is, an outright lie. And she even contradicts this statement earlier in the interview. If we want to go back to the 1950s, where women are stay-at-home moms, and fathers are the providers, then why are we fighting against the family court system that supports those gender roles? You know, those same gender roles supported by feminist groups like now. Amazing. In this one statement about the 1950s she has proven that not only does she know nothing about the men's rights movement, but that she is entirely battling against straw men. Next. And I don't see any MRAs leading the fight for equal rights when it comes to neurodiversity. Actually, we routinely talk about boys falling behind in the classroom, due to having different learning styles and needs, and essentially being treated like defective girls. Not to mention being drugged because their learning style and behavior is different from that of girls. Next. In fact, they typically are quick to utilize ableist language when debating. What exactly is ableist language? Let's look it up. And here is a list of ableist language. Terms like stupid, crazy, and nuts are not only in common use, but are routinely used by feminists. For example, let's look at feminist website, Jezebel. I remember having a conversation with a workmate long ago. I was in my 20s at the time, and he was in his late 50s. And somehow the topic of swearing came up. He told me that when he was a boy, his mother had taught him that weak-minded people use swear words, as there are so many other words to use instead. I replied that there are two possibilities here. The first is that these other words have the exact same meaning as the swear words they replace. In which case, what's the point? Is stepping in dog poo better than stepping in dog shit? Is it easier to scrape off your shoe? Does it smell less? If the words mean the exact same thing, then it's illogical to okay one, while condemning the other. The other possibility though, is that the replacement words have a different meaning than the swear words. Maybe having a crappy day isn't as bad as having a shitty day, or a fucking shit day. If different words describe different degrees of something, then they are all valid. Ultimately, policing language is futile. If a word becomes blacklisted and is shunned by society, people will just replace it with a new one, which will have the same meaning. And of course sometimes perfectly innocent words become bad words over time. For example, let's look at the Spastic Society. And no, the Spastic Society is not a group of trolls on 4chan. Well, not yet anyway, maybe after watching this video. But up until 1994, the charity now known as Scope, was then known as the Spastic Society. The term, spastic, in its medical use is not, or at least should not, be an offensive term. But over time it developed as a slur, possibly due to the Spastic Society publicizing their cause. It's similar with the word retard, which in its most simplistic and proper definition, means 1. To make slow. Delay the development or progress of an action, process, etc. Hinder or impede. 2. To be delayed. 3. A slowing down, diminution, or hindrance, as in a machine. If you think about it, fire retardant slows down the spreading of a fire. And one of the few things I remember from your 8th Italian class, in high school, is the phrase, Dario è sempre in ritardo, which translated means, Dario is always late. I'm guessing the Avanti Avanti book would be banned these days, due to political correctness. And to be honest, it should be banned, but not due to some PC paranoia, but simply because it was shit. Seriously, the only Italian it taught me was how to say some guy called Dario is always late, and I don't even know anyone called Dario. But the point here is, words have context, and often how offensive a word is deemed, comes down to its context, and often who is using it. For example,
well, it is a word that evokes many emotions in people. It's a derogatory racial remark that has divided people for many years.
And a Jefferson County high school teacher has now received the longest suspension on record for calling a student the N-word. WHAS 11's defender Renee Murphy investigates what happened and why in this story you'll only see on 11.
Valley Traditional High School is in the middle of a racial controversy right now. A teacher used the N-word towards a student. The word is only 6 letters long, but the impact is far-reaching. And we do want to warn you that some of the language in this story is strong, and it may offend you, it may offend some other people. But since the story is not just about the N-word, it's also about the teacher's intent and definition of the word, we have decided to leave it in the story for you to decide.
And what did he say specifically to you?
Sit down, nigga.
Keyshawn Chambers is a freshman at Valley High School, a Boy Scout, a football player, a member of the ROTC, an honor roll student. He was hanging around his teacher's classroom door in December. The teacher told him to sit down, and the teacher says that Keyshawn used the N-word first.
And I just kind of was stunned a second. Well, then get away from the door, nigga. And I repeated the same insult because that's sort of what I've been trained to do.
The school district says that is not what they trained English teacher Paul Dawson to do.
He tried to say I said it, and I didn't say it, and no one else in the class knows that I said it because I didn't.
Documents from the school investigation show that several of the students interviewed from Valley did not hear Keyshawn say the N-word first. Dawson says that students use the slang version of the N-word at Valley High School all the time. He says N-I-G-G-E-R is a racial slur, but says that students use N-I-G-G-A as often as they'd say dude or hey man. And Dawson says as much as he does not like the word, he still used the slang version to feel more comfortable with black students.
Why is this word used so frequently? I just don't understand it, and I'm trying to understand it. I need help. Yes, I use nigga. I've used it. I admit it. I put the H on it to emphasize it's nigga. That, nigga this, nigga please, nigga. Can you lend a nigga a pencil?
What kind of example are you setting for your students if you use a word that you don't want them to use?
Upon reflection, that's not good.
Dawson was suspended for 10 days without pay from January 9th to January 23rd, and he has to go to diversity training. He says that he's learned from this experience and hopes that others think twice before using the N-word.
I will never say any form of nigga. I'm cured of that.
Paul Dawson says that he is sorry for the way things were handled, but Keyshawn says that he is not looking for any apologies.
Apologizing is going to change the fact that it happened and he's not been punished.
And punishment in your mind is?
Not having his job anymore.
Paul Dawson says that he wants there to be a steadfast policy in Jefferson County Public Schools against people using the N-word. Right now, when it is brought up, it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis with the district. And we should mention that Keyshawn is still in Paul Dawson's classroom. Dawson has been with the district for 20 years, and Keyshawn is still in that classroom because Dawson is an honors English teacher. There are very few honors English classes, so he is still with him.
Well, now he was suspended for a while, but is he back teaching?
He is back teaching now, and he still does have his job. But this is not the first time that Paul Dawson has been suspended from Jefferson County Public Schools. Coming up at 5:30, we'll tell you what happened before. We'll tell you about his plan to appeal the suspension and why the district says that he should keep his job. Thank you very much. I'm sure we have
just a word of advice to any white teachers out there. It's probably not appropriate, nor a good idea, to use either version of that word. In fact, any teacher, of any racial background, shouldn't be using any type of racial slurs, full stop. But he did have a point. The word has two different contextual meanings, depending on who is using it, and how they are using it. And if anyone thinks he was using it in a contextually appropriate way, I've got some swampland to sell you, right after we finalize our deal over the Brooklyn Bridge. And although I can understand words like retard, or spastic, in the context of a slur being offensive, are we really going to go so far as to police words like crazy, or stupid, which are in such common use, by such a vast number of people, that trying to police such words would be, well, such an attempt would be crazy and stupid. And how exactly are we meant to describe someone's stupid idea, or crazy theory, or idiotic notion? But of course using these types of forbidden words only counts when we do it. Apparently it's perfectly okay for our opposition to use these words against us. I wonder if the word hypocrite is on the forbidden list yet? Next. In fact, they typically are quick to utilize ableist language when debating, if you even want to dub their polemics that. Feminists either in person or on the web and frequently are condescending when doing so. So I'd hardly call them egalitarian activists. Dare I point out again, 10 retarded things said by men's rights activists. Once again, this is a common strategy used by feminists. They point out a behavior which is done by both sides, but try to claim the high ground by claiming that only the other side does it. They seriously need to look up the meaning of the word hypocrite before the Ministry of Free Thought declares it a hate crime. But only in the context of using it against a feminist, of course. Next. Their behavior, especially when they troll en masse, illustrates a bit of an unapproachable, militant, and off-putting stereotype for men, which makes it that much more difficult for those who are non-cishet men to contribute to conversations involving hot-button issues like gender, gender equality, and gender-based violence. People have this idea that if you discuss something of this sort with a man on the internet, it's just going to turn into a war. You mean something like this?
This is what men's rights look like! 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 Yeah, they're fucking dumb! Fuck you! They're fucking pigs! How do you sleep at night, man? You fuckers!
EMRAs often list cases of women as perpetrators of violent crimes as evidence of complex institutional misandry. What is your reading of this argument? It's usually some kind of oppression Olympics. They want to play to take the conversation of the gender-based violence women experience and make it all about men. Wow, what a perfect example of Sargon's Law. I'm guessing most of you know what Sargon's Law is, but just in case you don't. Sargon's Law is, whenever a social justice warrior makes a character judgment, that judgment is true about themselves. I find it hilarious that she would accuse us of taking part in the oppression Olympics. Also just before in this very article, she said, "We believe there exists a stigma around men being subjected to violence. In this patriarchal society, men are expected to be able to be strong and to hold their own. There's a certain image that a man has to live up to, and if he doesn't then he is often preyed upon by the rest of society for his shortcomings. This is especially the case if men were to be attacked by women. Women are viewed as the fairest, or weakest sex, and with men being expected to act as the stronger sex, they are seen as subhuman if they cannot fend for themselves against attacks from women. Knowing that this stigma exists, many men surrender themselves to the whims of abusive partners as opposed to coming out about the violence that they face because the fear of what society will brand them as is more significant to them than the fear of their abusive partners. They can trust society to help them. So she is aware of gender-based violence towards men, and she is aware of the fact that it's not taken seriously by society. But then she says, they want to play to take the conversation of the gender-based violence women experience and make it all about men. If violence against men by women is a problem, and the fact that violence isn't taken serious is a problem, then would not talking about these problems be a step in the right direction? Apparently not, as we are only allowed to talk about gender-based violence towards women. And here we see the problem with feminists like this one. They are willing to admit to some men's issues, albeit in the dismissive tone of patriarchy backfiring, but are never willing to do anything about it, and in fact not only criticize those actually trying to fix the issue, but actively try to dismiss the issue as unimportant, as female issues are the only ones permissible in any discussion. So why bring it up in the first place, if they don't think it's important, or really an issue? Well, let me throw a phrase at you. I'm not racist, I have a black friend. It's the same shit as that. Next. We see it as them not being comfortable discussing a very serious issue that needs to be addressed, or in the worst case scenario, not being able to handle it altogether. But violence against women is discussed. It's discussed in the media, in our educational systems, and has entire governmental departments dedicated to it. The same cannot be said for gender-based violence against males. Next. Well folks, I was hoping to finish this article off this episode, and I have come close. There is only a little bit to go. But I don't want to rush it and have to squeeze it in. So I'm going to leave it till next episode. But until next time, always remember, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
So, I want to talk about the fact that you've taken gender studies courses, yet you are an MRA. Are you quite explicit about being an MRA in these classes? Like, or do you kind of have to be quiet about it?
Well, you know, people take badly to the term MRA, I guess. But I feel like if they meet me and they see that I'm rational and I'm calm and I'm whatever, stereotypes will break down. But I haven't actually, because I guess I became an MRA relatively recently, so I actually haven't taken any gender studies courses after I realized it's all, you know, a fallacy. So I didn't.
So
I haven't
you kind of bought into that narrative before, and then you switched after.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. What was that kind of turning point for you?
It was, as I said, the kind of lack of, like, there wasn't a search for truth. There was just there was a sense of imagination. Yeah, that, and there was a lot of anti-male sentiments, and it didn't sit well with me, even back when I didn't identify as an MRA.
You found a lot of hatred of masculinity and just being male in general. Yeah. Yeah, and what really bugged me is that it's like, well, this doesn't conform to the truth, to fact. Like, I just need to do a quick Google research to realize all of the plethora of men's issues that there are. So it didn't make sense to me. It's like these people, that sounds horrible. Them.
They, like, people in my, like, the kinds of people that are attracted to these academic circles, they have more of an ideological standpoint rather than a standpoint that conforms to the truth. And they claim to be on the forefront of gender and equality, but it never made sense to me.
So there are a few things I wanted to talk about in this podcast that all obviously relate to you being trans and an MRA and gender studies. And they are men's issues, trans issues, women's issues, the real solutions to these issues, and why the Tumblr solutions won't work. So which one did you want to start with? Which topic did you want to take a bite of first?
Let me have a look at my notes, because I wrote down a few notes just so that I don't stumble. So
yeah, for sure. And I would be more prepared. I apologize to everyone listening right now. I have been in a state of no power and no internet for a few days now. There was a huge storm that happened here. I'm in a different building than my house right now because there's no internet in my house. So that's what I've been dealing with.
I guess we can start with men's issues. Sure.
Men's issues?
Yeah.
All right. So what would you did your talk about men's issues at all, and what men's issues did you start to realize exist first? Like, what did you start to clue into first and realize were the biggest issues that existed for men?
I guess one of the biggest issues that I realized, well, actually, let me just say the first issue, and seemingly the biggest issue at the time, was that when men speak about their issues, they're completely invalidated.
Completely invalidated, yeah.
Yeah. And it takes someone like me to talk about these things before anybody really cares. And that was way back before I was an MRA, when I was more into kind of the more like social justice on campus kind of stuff. And it was like when men speak about issues, it's almost like they're perceived as though they're complaining from a place of privilege, like they're just whiny.
Yeah,
and it's a bunch of babies. Like that is basically the attitude that people had, and that was the biggest problem. And that really is kind of at the root of all of this, isn't it?
They can't even talk about their issues. That's that's got to be the thing you start at, and it's so true. Yeah. You look at my video on why I'm not a feminist that went viral, and this is a woman talking about men's issues. I talked about men's issues a lot in the video, and everyone was shocked to hear about them, because you're right. Every time the discussion is brought up, which of course it's usually going to be brought up by men, recognizing they have issues, whereas women are being taught men have no issues. Every time it's brought up by them, everyone goes ballistic and tells them to shut up, or just doesn't listen at all. So people were shocked to hear me say these statistics that men have been repeating for ages on A Voice for Men, that men have been repeating for ages in their own personal classrooms and being silenced. Yeah, so I definitely agree with you on that.
And then these people say that MRAs don't really do anything for men. Like, how are you going to get to do anything for men if you can't even get to the point where you listen to? Like, it blows my mind.
You're called a misogynist if you acknowledge that you have issues.
Oh yeah, I wear the title of misogyny as a badge of honor if a feminist calls me one, because it means nothing. It just means that I'm challenging them. It doesn't mean that I'm actually a misogynist. So I take pride in being called a misogynist by a feminist.
That's so true. It's so rare that you actually hear someone called a misogynist that is actually a misogynist.
Because I love women, and I think that, like, obviously that women are great, but don't call me a misogynist because I don't agree with your ideology. Like, that's insane.
Now, I have to ask, as a trans individual, do you ever have feminists make the argument against you where they try to invalidate you because you're trans when you talk about women's issues?
When I talk about women's issues?
Yeah. Do you ever have them try to invalidate you because you're a trans individual?
I don't know. I don't talk much about women's issues because
or even when you talk about men's issues in general.
I think what I'm mostly called, either they don't realize that I'm trans and they tell me that I got by on my looks, therefore I don't need feminism.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were trans at all when I first met you.
Or when they do realize I'm trans, they think I'm kind of self-hating, I guess.
Self-hating.
But I've never heard that they specifically say, oh, well, you're trans, so you can't talk about any of this stuff. So...
validate their social justice. They must have quite the heyday, the social justice-ness.
Yeah.
Trans MRA, they just kind of internally explode.
Yeah. I'm, for the most part, left alone at this point. People just kind of avoid me, I guess.
Too afraid to argue with you because they can't have trouble personally attacking you. Sorry, I'm choking on a cookie.